When a Florida court fined Pam Bondi $50,000 to silence her, no one anticipated her next step. But within seconds of entering the courtroom, she changed the whole scenario, leaving everyone flabbergasted. Pam Bondi had never expected to be drawn into a case like this, not after walking away from the legal limelight years ago and seeing what she had. But there she was, standing in courtroom 4B of the Hillsborough County Courthouse in Tampa, Florida, facing a $50,000 contempt fine with her name on it. The courtroom was silent, but it was hardly tranquil. It was stiff and tight. You could sense it in the way no one made eye contact, not the bailiff, not the stenographer, not even the local journalist scribbling notes beside the wall. Pam rose carefully as her name was called, adjusting the blue jacket she'd worn 100 times before. The judge did not waste time. "This court finds you in contempt for knowingly violating a direct gag order," Judge Corbin said simply. His tone was not hostile. It was weary and rehearsed. "You are hereby fined $50,000, which must be paid in full within 30 days. She didn't blink or flinch. She merely looked him straight in the eye and replied gently, "I understand." What really had folks sitting up was not what the judge said. Pam did it next. She dug into her briefcase and drew out a battered manila folder with 3 red tabs. It wasn't thick or showy. She held it in her palm without opening it and placed it gently on the table in front of her. The vibe in the room changed because everyone knew what that file may contain. They'd all heard the rumors. Pam had made severe charges in a recent radio appearance, including assertions that a sitting judge had hushed 2 whistleblowers in a corporate liability case, that papers had been buried, and that backroom transactions had impacted decisions. It wasn't only a legal drama. If true, it may have ended one's career, or worse. She hadn't identified names over the radio, but she had hinted strongly enough for the judge to feel the pain, prompting him to respond. And now she had a folder that may alter everything. Judge Corbin lifted his eyebrow. "Miss Bondi, do you have anything you want to provide to the court?" "I do," she said clearly, "but only if you are willing to hear the whole context." Her voice did not tremble. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight. And for the first time, the judge paused. He looked at the clerk, then Pam, and then back to the file. "You may proceed," he replied. She opened the folder with care, as if each page contained something holy. The first page was an email from 6 months ago, a communication between a junior clerk and a private attorney, marked with 3 simple words, "Client request rejected." The substance was dull until you read between the lines. The following document was a deposition from a court translator who had been discreetly terminated after expressing concerns about sealed testimony that had gone from the record. Finally, a notarized declaration signed, dated, and sworn under penalty of perjury by a former aide to Judge Corbin saying they were directed to conceal a file from evidence in a large civil dispute involving a local hospital. Pam placed each item, one by one, on the table in front of her. "I never breached the gag order," she claimed, "since I never addressed the case openly, but I did talk about what I saw and continue to witness behind closed doors. The public has the right to know when the law is being manipulated to benefit powerful interests." The courtroom was quite silent. You could hear the second hand of the wall clock tick. Judge Corbin didn't say anything. He sat back in his chair, his expression inscrutable. And with that, everything changed. But before we get into what Pam disclosed and how deep the narrative goes, there's something you need to know about the event that brought her here. 6 months ago, no one had threatened Pam Bondi with penalties. She was drinking coffee on her back patio in Clearwater Beach, watching the sun rise over the Gulf. She was semi-retired, consulting part-time, and speaking on occasion. At least that was the idea. Then she received the first call. It came from Leah Holcomb, an acquaintance from her early days at the state attorney's office. They hadn't spoken in almost a year, if not longer, but Leah's tone was anything but casual. "Pam, I need you to hear something," Leah had said. She sent a voicemail that lasted just under a minute. It was muted and recorded with another phone, but you could hear 2 people fighting over a sealed court document. One of the voices was unmistakably that of a guy. The other person was afraid. "I told you it wasn't in the file anymore." "He pulled it," the lady added. "Then you didn't hear it from me," the guy said. Pam played it 3 times. She phoned Leah back. "Where has this come from?" "I can't tell you." "You do not want to know." Pam did not sleep that night. The next day, she went 2 hours inland to Winter Haven to see Leah in person. They sat in Leah's kitchen with the shades shut and their phones turned off. That's when Leah gave her the file, which had a mix of printouts and handwritten notes, some of which were hardly visible. At the top was the name of a plaintiff, Jonas McNeil, a nurse who had sued a hospital for gross patient neglect. The issue was discreetly resolved last year, but according to Leah, the initial complaint included claims against 2 top officials that were eventually removed from the record. It's as if they wiped it clean, Leah said. The complaint we have now is not the one he filed. Pam sat back in her chair and stared at the papers. And who presided? Leah hesitated. Corbin. That name sounded strange. Back when Pam was still handling cases, Judge Corbin was known for being sharp, incisive, and difficult to read. No nonsense. He also had deep ties, private funders, golf weekends with corporate lawyers, and closed-door meetings that no one questioned. Pam did not talk for a time. When she did, it was just 2 words. I am digging. But she was not naive. She had been warned previously. A week after making her first public statement on a tiny local AM radio station, she received a phone call from an old mentor whom she trusted. Pam, I know what you're doing, he added quietly, but it won't go the way you expect. Corbin does not lose. He plays long. And if you keep chatting, people will not just be interested in your job. She said, I'm not working cases. He exhaled. They do not care. She hung up and sat quietly for a long time. Pam was not impulsive. She did not enjoy turmoil. Her career had been based on discipline, understanding when to fight and when to walk away. But something felt odd. There was too much rot under the surface and individuals were being harmed because no one had the courage to speak up. So she continued digging. She discovered Denise Kramer, a former court assistant who had served in Judge Corbin's office during the McNeil case. It took 3 meetings and a lot of prodding before Denise opened up. He instructed me to refile the transcript without the 3rd deposition. Denise said it was immaterial, but it wasn't. What was inside it? Pam asked. Denise paused, then murmured that the patient's death might have been avoided and that the hospital was aware. That's when Pam stopped asking for permission. She was aware she was crossing a boundary, but if she remained silent, she would be just another person looking the other way. So she said what she said, and 72 hours later, she was standing in court being punished for contempt. But Pam had no idea how swiftly the system would move to quiet her or how far some individuals would go to remove her from the story. Pam's journey grew more tortuous as she descended. Every file she opened, every voice she found seemed to lead to something greater. Not simply a bungled case or a crooked judge, but a habit, a framework that had been supported for years. The McNeil instance was not isolated. Pam discovered 3 more cases, 2 civil and 1 criminal, in which papers had been missing, sealed prematurely, or reworded before final entry. And in each of them, Judge Corbin sat on the bench. But it was not just him. Are there any lawyers involved? The same businesses. What about the clerks? Quiet transfers. What about the settlements? It is always sealed. What are the numbers? Always just enough to keep everyone quiet. It was like a screenplay and everyone had their role. Pam reached out to Jonas McNeil directly. He was cautious, even apprehensive, but agreed to meet her in the back room of a tiny cafe in Bradenton. He seemed older than his 38 years, as if the case had taken something from him. They urged me to be thankful for what I had, Jonas continued, stirring his coffee. They said that was the best I could hope for. Then they had me sign all of the papers. Confidentiality. No interviews or remarks. I assumed, well, maybe this is how it works. Pam leaned forwards. But you had more to say. He nodded slowly. Elijah, the patient, was 15 years old. He had a seizure at the emergency room. They left him alone for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. I informed them that he required continual monitoring. They ignored me, and after his death, they wiped the records. Pam felt it in her stomach. And you included it in the complaint? Yeah, Jonas muttered, and then it was gone. He provided her a copy of his original file, which he was not permitted to maintain. The contrast between that and the official version was unsettling. Pages had been reorganized. Names were omitted. Entire parts are gone. However, it wasn't the worst part. Pam returned home and began going through the files when she spotted something peculiar. An internal communication dated the day before Jonas' initial filing mentioned a settlement road and an early suppression effort. It was unsigned but definitely written by someone close to the court. The language was corporate, antiseptic, and disconnected. However, its connotation was sharp. They intended to bury this before it ever reached a trial, she mumbled. It was then that she knew Judge Corbin wasn't just prejudiced. He was part of something designed to manage outcomes, protect institutions, and eliminate accountability with a pen and a silent nod. And he was not working alone. Denise, the former court assistant, corroborated this when they met again. He has 2 individuals providing him case tactics before they appear on his docket, she claimed. One works for a private legal consultant in Tallahassee. The other remains on staff. Pam blinked. Still at the courthouse? Denise nodded, remaining in his ear. It seemed like something from a movie, yet no one was acting. These were real people, real judgments, and genuine damage. Pam realized how extensive the relationships were as she dug further. The fine was not for disrespect, it was for intimidation. A warning shot, a public smack to remind her who had the power. However, they had made an error in their calculations. Pam didn't get scared easily, and she wasn't alone. She received silent calls from others who had worked around Corbin. A paralegal who was dismissed after expressing concerns about missing evidence. A clerk recalls the judge approving orders before the proceedings had began. A former bailiff said he once saw Corbin enter a conference room with hospital attorneys during a break which no judge was supposed to be in. Each participant contributed another piece to the jigsaw, but none of them were willing to go public after seeing what happened to those who did. Word came around quickly. Not the whole tale, but enough of it. Enough for doors to begin shutting. Pam first noticed the difference approximately a week after speaking with Jonas McNeil. Her email, which was often inundated with legal invitations, suddenly became silent. A planned speaking appearance at a St. Petersburg law school was postponed. Then a legal panel that she was scheduled to preside surreptitiously withdrew her name from the flyers. At first, she attempted to dismiss it. Maybe it was the timing. Perhaps folks were simply busy. But when her longtime accountant, a guy she had trusted for years, contacted and urged she take a break from anything public, she realized it wasn't a fluke. It was a message. Pam, you're making people uneasy, he stated calmly. You are shaking trees that no one wants disturbed. I'm not here to console them, she said. Yes, they have lengthy memory and greater reach. She hung up, but the word remained. The following day, a writer from a mid-sized Gainesville newspaper contacted her to inquire about her previous public charges. He said someone from the judiciary had tipped him off, implying Pam was on a personal mission for significance, was resentful, and had an axe to grind. The journalist said that you are digging up ancient ghosts that do not exist. Pam did not argue. She just asked him one question. Have they mentioned the McNeil case? Silence. They didn't, she explained. No, he acknowledged. Nothing concrete, just broad statements. Pam exhaled. Then maybe you should ask yourself why. That call never went to paper. Then came the fine. She was not shocked that the contempt hearing was expedited. The court clerk had barely given her 2 days' notice. There were no details on what regulations she allegedly broke, just that her words interfered with the integrity of an ongoing case. Pam showed up nonetheless. She did not bring a lawyer, just herself, a legal pad, and a calm demeanor that caused several people in the courtroom to move in their seats. Judge Corbin did not even glance at her as he read the fine aloud. This is not a platform for personal crusades, Ms. Bondi, he remarked. This is a courtroom. There are rules. Pam said, I know the rules. I've watched them for 2 decades. I also recognize when they are being perverted. He didn't answer and simply went on. Pam focused on the faces in the room. The court reporter kept her eyes down. The bailiff, who was normally warm, stood stiffly and quietly. And in the back row, someone she didn't know, a guy in a gray suit with no notes or briefcase, observed her every move. When she sought to talk with one of the lawyers who had assisted with the McNeil case, she was ignored. Sorry, Pam, but I can't get involved, the guy muttered, peering around anxiously. I have a family to feed. I am not asking you to go on record. It doesn't matter, he mumbled. People speak. She walked away, feeling a chill settle in. It was not fear. It was clarity. This was not about preserving the court's image. This was about maintaining power. They were prepared to burn anybody who went out of line. That night, at home, she poured herself a glass of wine and revisited the manila folder which she'd eventually present to court. It now included 3 fresh declarations, all of which came from persons who stood to lose if they spoke. None of them wanted their identities recorded, but they trusted her. One of them wrote, if anyone can make the stick, it's you. Just take care. They don't play fairly. Pam sat with it for a long time. She wasn't sure what the next step would be, but she knew it needed to be public, loud, and recorded. She had previously been reprimanded for speaking too much. The only option to proceed now was to speak even more. But in order to do so, Pam had to return to the courthouse, face the judge who had attempted to silence her, and put everything on the line. Pam returned to court on a rainy morning. The sky was dark, the roadways were slippery with puddles, and traffic on I-275 into downtown Tampa went slowly. She traveled alone, with no driver or assistance, just a little leather case on the passenger seat behind her, the same one she had carried into murder trials 20 years before. Inside were two things, the manila folder which had been updated with new declarations and timetables and a printed motion that she had written herself at 2:30 a.m. It was just 3 pages long and included a formal response to the contempt fine as well as a countermotion demanding court review of the McNeil case's conduct. She chose to park at the far end of the courthouse lot rather to utilize the private door. Let them see her. The same security guy who had previously waved her through did so without saying anything. There was no grin or warmth, but it didn't matter anymore. Pam was not here to be liked. Courtroom 4B was half full with a few reporters and one assistant state attorney seated near the front. Even Judge Corbin's wife, Frances, who was always poised and seldom demonstrative, sat in the second row. Pam did not make eye contact with anybody. She stepped in, placed her paperwork on the table, and waited. It did not take long. Judge Corbin arrived punctually at 10:01 a.m. This hearing will address Ms. Bondi's official response to the previously levied sanction, he said. You may continue. Pam stood with no notes or laptop, just the folder. She added, Your Honor, I'm not here to question your authority or the court's right to impose an order, but I am here to challenge the narrative being used to punish me for speaking the truth. She held up the packet. I've provided a sworn declaration from Denise Kramer, your former court assistant, claiming inappropriate order to conceal deposition transcripts. I've also provided documents demonstrating differences between Jonas McNeil's first complaint and the one that was recorded into official records. Corbin's demeanor remained unchanged, but some others in the gallery sat up straighter. Pam continued,